Drew Barrymore was only 7 years old when the world fell in love with her. A tiny girl with wide eyes and messy blonde curls, standing beside an alien in one of the most iconic films in cinematic history. Cameras adored her. America adored her. Hollywood predicted a lifetime of glory. But fame doesn't come with instructions, especially not when you're a child. Because just a few years later, the same little girl who smiled on red carpets would become a headline for entirely different reasons. Party scenes, tabloid covers, public meltdowns, and a question whispered across entertainment columns: how did it go so wrong so fast? This is the story of transformation, not just from child star to adult actress, but from chaos to control, from being the industry's cute prodigy to becoming a woman who learned how to rewrite her own narrative. If you look closely at Drew's earliest interviews, there's a clue hiding in plain sight. A confidence that didn't match her age, a hunger for approval that ran deeper than applause. That childhood blueprint would shape everything that followed: the rise, the fall, and the quiet reinvention that most people never fully understood. So here's the question we're opening tonight. Was Drew Barrymore's then versus now a comeback story, or was it survival? Studios didn't see a child trying something new. They saw legacy, expectation, continuation. But legacy can be heavy for small shoulders. In early interviews, even at 7 or 8 years old, Drew spoke with unusual confidence. She knew where to look when cameras flashed. She understood how to charm adults in the room. She laughed easily, sometimes too easily. And beneath that natural charisma was something more fragile, a child who quickly learned that attention equals affection, that applause equals validation. This is the first childhood clue. Drew associated love with performance. She didn't just enjoy acting, she needed it. Because in an industry environment where adults made decisions and schedules ruled life, performing became her way of controlling something. If she could make people smile, she could belong. If she could make them clap, she mattered. The second blueprint detail hides in her energy. Watch old talk show appearances closely. Drew is playful, but slightly overeager. She leans forward. She interrupts gently. She wants to be liked. That eagerness becomes a pattern later in life. When fame shifts from wholesome to chaotic, that same desire to be liked doesn't disappear. It simply searches for attention in different rooms. Childhood fame also meant childhood exposure. Drew wasn't protected from adult spaces the way most kids are. She attended events filled with celebrities, flashing lights, and grown-up conversations long before she understood what those environments demanded emotionally. When the world treats you like a miniature adult, you start performing adulthood before you're ready to process it. And here's where the blueprint deepens. Drew grew up fast, but not gradually. The transition from adored child to independent teenager happened under a microscope. There was no quiet phase of figuring herself out. Every shift was public. Every experiment was documented. The little girl who once learned that love comes from applause would soon test that belief in riskier ways. Because if performance creates connection, what happens when the performance changes? And that's exactly where the next chapter begins, when opportunity collides with identity and the spotlight gets brighter than anyone expected. The first spark wasn't subtle, it was explosive. When Drew appeared in E.T. the Extraterrestrial, she didn't just play a role, she became the emotional heartbeat of one of the biggest films of its time. Audiences didn't see a performance, they saw authenticity, a child who felt real, vulnerable, magnetic. The camera loved her instinctively, and the industry noticed immediately. Overnight, Drew wasn't just talented, she was bankable. That's the moment the spark ignited, when opportunity and charisma collided at full speed. Premieres followed, talk shows followed, magazine covers followed. Drew's face became shorthand for innocence and wonder. She wasn't just a young actress, she was America's little sister. The world projected purity onto her, and Hollywood packaged that image carefully. Every smile reinforced the narrative. Every red carpet appearance strengthened the myth. But fame at that level doesn't grow slowly. It accelerates. The first break isn't only about success. It's about scale. Suddenly Drew wasn't just acting. She was working constantly. Interviews blurred together. Expectations multiplied. And here's where the shift begins. The image the public adored became a fixed frame. Cute. Adorable. Sweet. Labels that sound harmless, until they start limiting who you're allowed to become. As Drew entered her early teens, something changed. The same intensity and hunger for approval that made her shine now pushed against the boundaries of that child star box. The world wanted her frozen at 7. But she was growing. Fast. And growth doesn't cooperate with nostalgia. The media didn't document her adolescence gently. They documented it loudly. Party scenes, adult environments, headlines that shifted tone from celebration to concern. What once felt like a fairy tale began to feel like a cautionary tale. And the speed of that narrative change is what makes this chapter so pivotal. The public didn't slowly adjust to Drew becoming a teenager. They reacted to it. This is the cost of early mythology. When you're introduced to the world as innocence, any deviation feels dramatic. The box was officially built. Drew was no longer just a young actress navigating fame. She was a symbol people felt entitled to protect, judge, or criticize. The first spark created a legend. The first break created a trap. And in the next chapter, that trap tightens, because peak fame isn't just about success, it's about expectation becoming louder than identity. If childhood built the image and teenage years cracked it, the peak era is where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Drew Barrymore wasn't the troubled former child star anymore. She was back, and this time, she was everywhere. Romantic comedies dominated the box office, and Drew became the face of a softer, warmer kind of leading woman. Films like The Wedding Singer and Never Been Kissed reintroduced her to audiences not as scandal, but as charm, relatable, funny, emotionally open. This was her commercial peak. Red carpets looked different now. The chaotic headlines faded. Interviews felt grounded. She laughed about her past instead of being defined by it. Hollywood loves a comeback narrative, and Drew fit it perfectly. The industry reframed her story from fallen child star to resilient survivor. But here's the hidden tension. Even in reinvention, a box still exists. The box just changed shape. Instead of innocent child, Drew became quirky rom-com sweetheart. The public once again latched onto a specific version of her, bubbly, optimistic, emotionally expressive. And just like before, that version came with expectations. Be lovable, be open, be the girl audiences root for. Peak fame always carries a subtle contract. We celebrate you, but we also freeze you. Behind the scenes, Drew wasn't just acting, she was building. She co-founded a production company, pushing for creative control instead of simply accepting roles. That move signaled something deeper than career success. It signaled ownership. The little girl who once equated love with applause was now structuring her own platform. Still, the pressure didn't disappear. Media cycles don't forget history. Every new project came with references to the old story. Every success was measured against the comeback narrative. Drew had escaped the chaos, but she was still living inside a storyline people loved to repeat. That's the paradox of peak fame. It feels empowering, yet it can quietly reinforce another identity trap. Because even when you rise again, the world still prefers a simplified version of you. And this is where the real switch begins, not in box office numbers, not in hairstyles, but in mindset. In the next chapter, we move from image to control, from being defined to defining. The real transformation doesn't happen on a red carpet. It doesn't happen in a new haircut. It doesn't happen in a headline. It happens in control. By the time Drew reached her late 30s and 40s, something subtle had shifted. She was no longer chasing validation from Hollywood, she was building her own ecosystem. The little girl who once needed applause to feel secure had learned something far more powerful. Ownership is louder than attention. Visually, the then versus now contrast is striking. In the 1980s, Drew looked like innocence in motion, wide-eyed, expressive, eager. In the 1990s, the image hardened, rebellion, experimentation, instability. In the 2000s, she softened into romantic leading lady energy. But in her now era, there's something different. Grounded warmth. The camera no longer feels like something she's performing for. It feels like something she's comfortable beside. That's layer 1 of the switch, presence without performance. Layer 2 is career direction. Instead of depending solely on acting roles, Drew diversified. Producing, entrepreneurship, lifestyle branding, and eventually hosting her own daytime program, The Drew Barrymore Show. This wasn't just another job, it was symbolic. She was no longer the subject of interviews, she was leading them. That shift is psychological. When you spend childhood answering questions crafted by adults, becoming the person asking questions changes the power dynamic entirely. Drew now controls the tone, the pace, the narrative, and unlike the chaotic exposure of her youth, this visibility feels intentional. Layer 3 is emotional intelligence. In recent interviews, Drew speaks openly about therapy, motherhood, boundaries, and forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness. There's no frantic energy, no hunger to impress. The approval she once chased externally seems to have been replaced by stability. The most interesting part? She doesn't erase her past, she references it calmly, almost protectively, as if those chaotic chapters belong to a younger version she understands instead of resents. That's not rebranding, that's integration. Then Drew reacted to fame. Now Drew manages it. And here's the true wow moment. The transformation isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming someone regulated. The intensity that once searched for love through chaos now channels into connection through conversation. But even with control comes pressure, because audiences love redemption arcs, and they expect consistency. So the final chapter asks a deeper question. Is Drew Barrymore finally free from the box? Or has she simply built a better one?
The final chapter isn't about box office numbers. It isn't about red carpets. It's about regulation. Drew Barrymore's then versus now isn't a simple comeback arc. It's a survival evolution. The child who equated applause with love learned that applause fades. The teenager who searched for identity in chaos learned that chaos is exhausting. The romantic comedy queen learned that being lovable doesn't require being lost. Now Drew doesn't chase the spotlight, she curates it. The childhood clue from part 2 comes full circle here. The need to belong didn't disappear. It matured. Instead of performing for connection, she facilitates it. Instead of reacting to headlines, she builds platforms. Instead of running from her past, she integrates it. So was this a comeback story? No, it was a reclamation story. And the real transformation isn't fame regained, it's agency regained. Because sometimes then versus now isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally becoming stable enough to be yourself.